which is at Jocadia Grid. And let me begin by telling you that it's been an interesting time for the University of Richmond's engagement in Second Life. In fact, it's fair enough to say that the last 4 months have been rather tumultuous. I'm going to advance to the second slide. With the end of educational discounts for our university, we had some very difficult decisions to make. But we'd already faced some difficulties using virtual worlds. This is not merely about Second Life, of course. The steep learning curve for these environments and our local system of incentive and rewards for faculty had really discouraged any use of virtual worlds in our curriculum. As of last semester, only I and another colleague, by the way, his position was just cut during this recession. Only the two of us had been working actively in virtual worlds with students. I had built an interactive simulation based on Edgar Allan Poe's novella, The Fall of the House of Usher, and with some help from my colleague, we beta tested the simulation in an English class and used it in 2 others that focused on new media. And take a water break here. Just as I would at an actual conference. Well, this is an actual conference. I should say a physical conference. Now, our goals were to inspire students to reread Poe's work closely and to explore how, after seeing in 3 dimensions, how a writer's obsessions and those of his era made for enduring works of fiction. We set our retelling of Usher in 1847 with actors in the roles of Roderick and Madeline, the doomed brother and sister of Poe's story. Student actors in period garb played Poe's narrator and were given tasks for a session of improvisational acting that followed. All of our teams had the role-playing goal of saving the Ushers from what might be a family curse, a medical crisis, or even a nefarious body snatcher of a doctor. I played that role. Students really enjoyed it. But then we had to pull it all down. Faced with a tier we could no longer fund from our discretionary budget, we decided not to renew our contract with Linden Lab. In January of this year, Usher, a product of 200 hours of my time and another 100 by my students, and at least another 100 by a student worker who helped me build, well, all of that went back into my inventory. As the last of 6,000 prims vanished, I was on my own. But this was not unfamiliar. As an educator who learned the rudiments of HTML in 1994, and as one of the first developers of an academic web page on our campus, I recognize the sensation of looking across a blank horizon devoid of settlements. That excitement made any remaining resentment about Linden Lab's decision fade, and quickly. There's something about gaining autonomy that can do that. A rapid grid hunt followed for a less expensive home where we could have off-grid backups of all of our materials. In other words, I wanted to avoid being stuck the way I was when we had to pull down Usher here in SL. This led me to Jokai Wollongong and Jocadia Grid. My presentation will discuss the challenges and accomplishments 4 months on, because we migrated, as the slide shows, in October 2010. We really had to begin planning. I hope that this talk will be of particular use to those of you relatively new to virtual worlds in general, but new to OpenSim in particular. Maybe you're thinking of expanding your horizons to other grids, and you're uncertain about where to begin. By the way, this is a good tag team with John Lester following me. You'll hear a lot about what his work has done outside of SL. And if you heard Maria Korolov's talk yesterday, you've heard about the potential of hypergrid. I'll touch on all those things. Move on to the next slide here. This slide, as soon as it reses, will show what we had in Second Life. It should be on the left-hand side of your slide. And then on the right, where we were when we began resing things in Jocadia Grid. Moving to OpenSim really involves more than creating a new avatar. Arriving was easy, and I even had estate managers with the names Roderick and Madeline Usher, which was really a nice aspect of being in a new grid. Resing my alpha prem was familiar. Uploading textures was free on the new grid. But what was I to do next? In Second Life, a huge marketplace of reasonably priced, high-quality items exists for educators who, say, need a piano, an easy chair, a fireplace, or a gargoyle. Those were all useful props for our old House of Usher. The balloon you see up there was actually a teleporter bought from a steampunk developer. And that was beyond my skill in OpenSim. I'm not a scripter, and nearly every item I needed for Usher, from furnishings, scripted items, landscaping, and avatar costumes, needed to be made by me or other pioneers at Jocadia Grid. Because I would be using megaprims on the new grid, most of the items I'd made and textured in Second Life were useless, even though I could legally export and import them with the Impotence client, which tends to be my favorite client when I'm outside of SL. It was 1847 indeed. I was back on the frontier. I'm going to quote here from, I'm alternately reading notes and speaking extemporaneously here as well. As American frontier humorist Johnson Jones Hooper once had a fictional character named Simon Suggs say, "It is good to be shifty in a new country." Now, my non-U.S. audience members may not know what shifty means or may have only a negative view of that term, but my goals would be shifty in its positive sense, looking for opportunities, finding treasures, making do or doing without, in the same way that pioneers must in a physical landscape. On the next slide, you'll see the factors that led me to one particular grid. And I don't know if Jo Kay's around here today, but she'll be blushing because any of us who've worked with Jo Kay know how wonderful she is as a manager, as a colleague, as an enabler for our best work. But that was only the start. If Jo Kay's grid had not featured what I needed, I probably would have been a frequent visitor, but maybe not a resident. Those new to Open Simulator as a teaching and learning environment need to consider a few things. First, whether a closed grid such as Second Life or N-Worlds or Open Life, or for now at least Third Rock Grid, whether these types of grids offer you the optimal choice for working with students and colleagues. Alternately, if you're a potential grid nut, you need to consider whether this emerging constellation of grids linked by hypergrid teleports, the subject of Maria's talk yesterday, offers the better option. Well, you can tell I opted for that. I believe that strongly to be the future of virtual worlds. I'm sure that closed grids will have a place. I would argue that in my case, an open grid linked by hypergrid technology proved to be the key advantage. Jo Kay's support for us educators and students has been exemplary, as I mentioned, and I like to reward those who support educators with my money. I'm paying out of pocket for my work at Jocadia Grid because the university is no longer funding any work in virtual worlds. I also like to make my home in a place that gives me freedom to build as I see fit and that treats me as a colleague rather than just as a customer. Now, I'm no master builder, but for a pioneer I do well enough, and I figured I could build what I needed. I wanted, in short, to be part of a community of educators who would come to visit me from their own homes across the constellation of OpenSim grids and could help with the development of what I was already calling Usher 2.0. This type of space, and here I'll read, exemplifies Kenneth Bruffy's ideas about social constructivist learning in the writing classroom. But now I was thinking not merely about writing, but about making stories in 3 dimensions. We hypergrid denizens were building a new world together, and from it, in social constructivist learning, new knowledge would inevitably arise. I'll pause for a second. In other words, I wanted every barrier to hypergrid visits removed, and I wanted to give any of my creations, worthy enough to consider, to others to take home with them. Now I realize that runs counter to the interests of many merchants and closed grids, and I can see why they remain reluctant to provide content to linked OpenSIM grids. But that is decidedly not my concern. We educators are not here to make money. We are here to form communities and share ideas and advance human knowledge and deepen student engagement. That's all I really care about. As with the Internet itself in Barlow's famous Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace in 1996, a virtual world, quote, consists of transactions, relationships, and thought itself, arrayed like a standing wave in the web of our communications. The wave advances, changing us and our students, while a set of practices, pedagogy, and other techniques for good learning emerge. This is a technique that considers the virtual space itself. It's native to it. I'll talk a little bit about pedagogy now. Get to my next slide here. My mouse is acting up on my computer. There we go. My pedagogical considerations focused on a few issues. First, OpenSIM does not yet support the number of avatars per SIM that we take for granted here in Second Life. At least to me, that wouldn't matter. I don't need more than 7 or 8 avatars present for each session in the House of Usher. That's a picture, by the way, of Madeline Usher in her coma on the bed in the SL build of the House of Usher. And you'd see some student actors and Roderick in the brown duster, the same one I'm wearing, there by the bed. Most grids lack physics, such as we find in Second Life. Now, this could be a showstopper if I were making a simulation of Poe's descent into the maelstrom. But for Usher, and most of the related work I contemplate linked to it, good story and effective role play trump special effects. I'll later share some resources for the effects we did find. Particle scripts for fog or fire or candlelight, pardon me. Secret doors that would open with a chat password. Ghosts who would appear and give visitors a warning. We were able to accomplish all of those in OpenSIM readily, and they were key special effects to providing students with clues and other information when they would complete a simulation. Finally, the limited scope of a one-region virtual experience in no way hampered my work. Though Jocadia Grid consists of at least 80 regions, my students will need only pre-made avatars. We're going to have them ready to go with Victorian clothing. They'll get a short orientation, and they'll do it all in one sim. The next time I teach in a virtual world, in other words, they're not going to go exploring. They don't need a large community. If your teaching requires that, then some of the OpenSIM grids may not be the best choice, but for me it was perfect. I only needed a place with a single assignment. I didn't need a launching pad, in other words, for exploring an entire online community. In other settings and other assignments, students might need that. They might need a new world in all of its glory. For my students, all they need is an old house, some good actors, and a very disturbing piece of fiction written by a master of psychological horror. Of course, the trick is we only had to build it. I'll return to my pioneer metaphor for a minute. Pioneers face these sorts of struggles in a physical environment. And this conference's group of Second Life pioneer educators, if you just think back, you had to carve out spaces for yourself in a virtual world with a large population and an emergent set of social norms and commercial practices. And we're still doing that. Pioneers love freedom. Unfortunately, as teachers, we also have to consider student evaluations, mandatory assessments of our work and theirs, hardware and software standards, mid-semester upgrades of both, and other sorts of problems that can hamper our teaching outside of the scope of our pedagogy and plans. My advice for potential OpenSIM educators is the same as those I give to anyone new to Second Life. Spend a half year or more traveling, studying, attending events, and designing assignments before you bring in a class. But even doing that, you're going to be making up a lot of things yourself. And my next slide talks about the DIY ethos of the edupunk movement. I didn't know what I was as a teacher until I encountered that term. I've always been the sort of person who makes up my own things. DIY, do it yourself. And in OpenSim, the lack of most amenities didn't stop me. Because let's think about it. A virtual world is more than hair, clothes, and pose balls. It's about stories and community. Otherwise, very limited virtual worlds that are popular wouldn't have made it. I will say, though, when you're building a simulation, textures are important. I'm pretty good with Photoshop. But I did spend a lot of time, in order to not infringe on anyone's IP rights, I spent a lot of time just taking pictures, running around with my digital camera, photographing old doorways, photographing stonework, getting into Photoshop and making textures. I found that two key skills with Photoshop saved me. And I'm sure you can do this with GIMP as well, using the layering tools and especially learning to create alpha layers to create TGA files. I don't even know what TGA stands for. Is it targeted graphics something or other? But what it does is it lets me create transparency effects. Any clothing designer in SL knows how this works. I could lower prim counts with that. And I think it was not a steep learning curve because I'm already pretty good with Photoshop. But in addition to my own pictures, I needed to learn to mash up images. But to mash up images, I needed to find creative content, Creative Commons licensed textures. There are a couple of ways I did that, and you can IM me or email me if you need advice on this, but it's pretty straightforward. At both Flickr and at Google Images, you can do advanced searches for CC licensed content that'll let you make derivative works. So I was able to get old walls, doorways, church doors, all sorts of clockwork, all sorts of textures that I could use and give attribution to the builders, to the creators in my own work. And I used Photoshop's layer tools copiously to rearrange small elements. This way, when I had something like a wall or a floor, I didn't have the same repetition. But you can see it in this build. You can see how well the builders have textured things so you don't feel like you're looking at one repetition after another. And thank you, Combi. I appreciate that. And thank you, Bitterleaf, for those comments. If you see them you'll find some other resources you can click on and get more information. We had learned a lot in Second Life building Usher, and because of that, our time needed to get the build correct was greatly reduced. Here's a shot I took the other day with the interface on over in Jocadia Grid. You can see the difference between a plain old 2-prim causeway at the top that's solid and using the select texture feature to get some more interest. That's a 2-prim item, and that's the causeway that goes across the moat at the House of Usher. I just applied a simple archway texture at the bottom. And that really saves us when it comes to lag, because even with, I forget how many prims I have. I think I have 20,000 on my region. I've used approximately 2,000 right now to get much further than we did in Second Life. But I still wanted to be careful with the number of scripts and prims to avoid lag on the sim, because that will just spoil the experience like nothing else. Well, as I built in Jocadia Grid, one good thing for OpenSim pioneers is that I found almost no learning curve beyond one bug that I will identify for you. And this may still exist. I still see it occasionally in builds there that I never saw in Second Life. When you're editing a large linked set of prims, you have to be very careful. If you link things prematurely and then try to texture one part, you can have all sorts of issues. The prim will disappear, reappear later. It's hard to move. So I tend to get my textures just right before I link everything up. And that's been the only real bug that's hampered me as a builder. But otherwise, OpenSim's in-world build tools are very familiar to anybody who's done building in Second Life. So that part of immigrating to a new grid posed no problems at all. Now, if we can get this Pioneer rucksack to work down here, back by the red pyramid, you can I can give you one afterwards if we have any trouble opening that up. That's a rucksack created originally by Arcadia Asylum, a wonderful builder who's unfortunately stopped building in Second Life, but she gave her content away. And I could think of nothing better than her hobo backpack to contain all the materials that I wanted to give out today. But in that backpack, you'll find some textures and some other materials that I've used over in OpenSim and here. Arcadia's work really inspired me to give things away. When I came here and I brought students in at first, I had to find freebies. The same is true at Jocadia Grid. Anything I create there, I'm going to give you. And we're developing, a really nice newbie dome at Jocadia Grid where you can pick up most anything, whether you're hypergridding in or out. And if you do get something from me and you find the textures don't convey to your new grid, just email me. You can contact me in Second Life. I can send you my email, and I will send you the texture as a JPEG file, and so you can just slap it on there. In time, I hope to have an archive online with zip files of all the textures, as well as items that we've created, 3D items, so you can bring them to your grid. This is what educators do. We share our materials. We share and share alike. We work in a gift economy. Scripting is another matter. I'm no scripter, as I've said earlier. As I began creating scripts not provided in the general set that Jocadia gives to us, I used two tools that in Second Life have proved to be real lifesavers. I think it's on my previous slide. I'll back up there for a second. Both of these tools have limited functionality, so the scripters out there will chuckle at this. But for me, what did I need? I needed doors that would open, ghosts that would appear with a text chat command, objects that would slide or rise or fall. Didn't need anything fancy because the focus on Usher, and we needed a lot of note cards to be given out. The focus at Usher is on good role play and improvisational acting. The students are looking for clues. If you know the Numbacula game in SL that's sadly about to close because of tier considerations, you can see where my inspirations came from. Most of that is pretty simple. Both the tools that I used, Scratch for Second Life and ScriptMe, have limited functionality for more advanced work, but they were just what I needed. You'll find URLs for them. That red pyramid has a URL giver. You'll find URLs for both of these tools if you click the red pyramid. Let me talk a little bit about Scratch. It's a very simple script builder, and it appeals to visual learners like me. You can essentially, I should have a screenshot of it, I didn't take one for today, but you can put together visual elements and then change variables, and like you're assembling a jigsaw puzzle, and make your script. Then you click a button and generate the script. Unfortunately with Scratch, the developer never finished it. I mean, it works, but he didn't add all of the functionality that he might have added. He's gone on to other projects, which is too bad. I wish someone else would pick up Scratch and continue developing it. It's the best script builder I've ever seen. Combined with that in ScriptMe, I was able to find some Creative Commons licensed scripts online. I was able to accomplish several things. Again, here are some of the effects that I wanted. Secret doors opened with a password typed in chat. In fact, that's the only way, finding the password is the only way you can save Madeline Usher when she's locked in the family crypt, buried alive. Second thing we wanted is to make objects that res something when they're touched. Third is we wanted to create a decent fireplace, candles, and other items using particles. My candles are awful, by the way. I'm not pleased with them. I'm going to start over. But the fireplace turned out pretty well. So did fog banks and other things. We wanted to create atmosphere. I understand that some LSL scripts do not work properly in OpenSim, but I've not yet encountered that problem. But as I said before, I wanted scripting minimal to reduce lag. And as I've said, the core of the Usher experience in OpenSim, as it was in Second Life, would be good role play and clever decisions by students who have read Poe's text, and more importantly, after doing an initial orientation, are tempted to go back and read more deeply, because they will know that to solve the mystery and to save the Ushers, you have to know Poe's poetry and its story. You have to go hunting for clues in the books as well as in the simulation. We found this with the last two classes that used it in particular. They weren't the beta test class. They had to keep going back and digging for clues to return to the simulation to save Madeline and Roderick. Now, sound was another issue as we built the simulation because I decided I did want some sounds, if only creaking doors and rattling chains. Freesound.org is a lifesaver. It's a share and share alike site, and I can create sounds, so I'm going to be sharing some sounds there that I'm going to make for Usher over the summer as I work with a student developer again, and I have some time to do this while my student does some other tasks. At that site, you can pick up MP3 files and WAV files up to 10 seconds long, and some longer ones, but you can download them, edit them, and upload them to your new grid and get the effects you need. In terms of build time, would it taken me 200 hours to build in Second Life? Should, when done, only take about 50 hours in Jocadia Grid. Now that's not a really an apples to apples comparison. It could have taken me 50 in Second Life, but what's happened is I've become a more experienced builder. The work here really transferred directly to save me time and energy over there. I think we'll need another 50 hours over the summer to add all the elements to get the simulation ready for teaching in the fall. I'll be bringing in a literature class that will use it as a final project. We want to also make sure we have a rich backstory for Usher. We're going to be able to go beyond the house. And in Second Life, we only had the house in a bubble high over our university's island. Here we're going to have an entire world based on Poe, a wreck of the ship from the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, and we've woven that into the backstory of the Usher family. They were wreckers on the coast of Yorkshire near Whitby, and to keep the family in business, the father went back to the ancient practice of wrecking. So there's recently been a ship wrecked, and there are clues hidden in the wreckage. We've got other things as well, a family graveyard, other sorts of things with clues hidden. Some of them are fleshed out from details in Poe's story. Some come from his other stories. I'll go to the next to last slide here. We'll have plenty of time for questions today and plenty of time for John Lester to set up. I want to reiterate the trade-offs of working at OpenSim. Let me go one more slide. I think most of this has been covered, but they do merit a little more discussion. I call this looking before you leap. I asked Maria yesterday about the emergence of a intergrid marketplace, and she thinks it's coming. It can't come fast enough for me because think about what we pay for items in Second Life. In real life terms, most of it is a pittance. It would be far easier for educators who have less time than they do pocket change to simply download things to their grids, buy them from a intergrid marketplace and download them. So we've been making do with our small local marketplaces and what we can build ourselves. Depending on your project, you could either have to hop to another grid or come to a large closed grid such as InWorlds or Second Life to find community. You have to keep in mind about the avatar count. It's going to be, for the foreseeable future, lower per sim than in SL. But the most important thing, I'll say this again, you've got to start exploring before you go to OpenSim. Start with the travel agency called the Hypergrid Adventurers Club. Now, John Lester, he's known as Pathfinder Lester here in Second Life, you all know him, will give you a great chance to look before you leap. And he's going to make you leap. You will, on a regular basis, go through the hypergates to new destinations. The URLs for Path's site and other useful websites are back here. I'll point to my pyramid. You can touch that for the URLs. My last slide comes from one of my students. Overall, and I'll reflect here holistically, the 4 months in OpenSim had gone far more smoothly than I'd anticipated. The real test for our simulation will come this fall when 24 students from a 200-level lit class will use the Jocadia Grid simulation in groups of 3 and 4. I'm confident that the sort of response I get will be like this one, and I'll quote this student. I could see, hear, and experience the story on a first-hand basis. Not only did I feel engaged, but I felt as if I had a role to play in this story. I was no longer a passive reader, but an active actor within the story. I don't know about you if you're a teacher, but that's not a bad outcome to get, and that was a typical response from the last group that used Usher. Now I'll take questions from the audience. I don't know how big our group is. I haven't been camming around. You can just put your questions into text chat, and I'll do my best to answer. Thank you, folks. And don't forget to pick up your rucksack and get the URLs before you leave. Any questions?
It was really interesting, Iggy. It's great to hear a bit more about OpenSim. I haven't had a good play with it myself yet. I recently looked at a site about putting the sim on a stick that I thought I might have a go at when I've got some time to sit down and do it. So I'm sure people have got some questions.
Starlight asks about voice. Now that we have Vivox voice in OpenSim, I think we'll be able to use it easily at Jocadia Grid. I haven't asked Joke when it's rolled out, and that would be useful. Students who worked in Second Life with me always found voice to be useful after they'd gotten accustomed to it. We don't really need text chat transcripts for the Usher project, so that isn't really a consideration. That's one of the key reasons I like using text chat is students can keep records when they have interviews and so on. But I think using voice would make it even more natural. Other questions? You can also, I added a link to the wiki at the URL giver. That's got a gallery of some student projects as well as some photos the students took in Second Life, so you can get an impression of what things were like at Usher. How many hours do I spend building initially? Well, that's a good question. I think to get the house itself ready in OpenSim, I had the walls up in about 10 hours and had the floors in place and began putting in clues. In SL, it was about 20 to 30 because we didn't know what we were doing. We basically imported a build from Google SketchUp, and that was not a good idea. It was overprimmed. It was too big. And what I had accomplished with 6,000 sims in SL, we're now at 2,000 at Jocadia Grid, and I've got a whole island. I mean, that includes other things other than the house. I imagine we'll ring in at about 10,000 when we have a forest and we have other landscape, but the house itself is going to be half what it was in Second Life, if that, and probably half the building time. Checking the chat here if there are other questions for me to answer. I hope that answered your question, Callie. Absolutely, Combi. Having an open source download repository for items is crucial. And I think isn't that how we've done things in education for years? Our research tends to be open source. So I'd like to see the same thing with our other content. Academics are content creators. And that's one reason all my courses are on the open internet and not in Blackboard. I simply do not want my materials inside of a gated community. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do, Callie, is have them as downloadable zip files. But I think we need a common place where we can all put our content. Stellanos, some of it. I mean, there were a few things I just imported using Imprudence. I brought in our downspouts for the house. I brought in several elements that I'd created over in Second Life. And sometimes the textures didn't transfer, but that was okay because these are textures I created. I just uploaded them for free and retextured the items. But because we could use megaprem elements in a way, even on our private island, we could have used more megaprems initially, but we were novice builders. We thought that the megaprem prohibition applied to private estates as well. And we realized it didn't, so we repremmed the whole build in SL. At the same time, I could never resize a megaprem in Second Life. It would snap to 10 by 10. That doesn't happen over there in Jacadia Grid. So I ended up recreating a lot of things, but it went a lot faster. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, most of the stuff we recreated. Many of the scripts we had written in SL, though, we simply copied and pasted, and they worked fine. That saved us a lot of time. Like our script that makes the ghosts evoke when you touch an item, because we have helpful family ghosts that will provide students with clues and warnings about the ushers. Yeah, I think 255 is pretty amazing. Callie, Viv, and I were talking about doing a cyberpunk simulation, maybe based on Metro holographics in Neuromancer, because I teach Neuromancer frequently, and the students have a lot of trouble with that text. The prose is hard. I don't think they can see the world. That's going to be a very different build. But yeah, that's in my sights. We've got Viv and I have an article coming out in EDUCAUSE Quarterly about Usher, and we're doing a few revisions before publication. And there's one question that, thank you, one question that came out from reviewers that I don't know how to address. That is, if you build something this complex for one text, what's the return on your investment? I mean, if you spend hundreds of hours building one reading lab, and my best answer is, if it's a text I teach regularly, over several years it's going to recoup my time. And I can make small changes between semesters. The reward that you get from students enjoying this and engagement. I found students generally did not enjoy traveling in a virtual world, just going out and doing assignments. It varied from semester to semester. But when they had a targeted, these are millennial learners, American millennial kids want explanations for everything, why they're doing it, what the outcome will be, how it's related to their learning, how the assessment works. I mean, they can really bug you to death. They didn't do that so much when I had them do a targeted simulation, because we did a short orientation for the groups. We talked about what the relationship was to pose text. We talked about it as a reading lab using avatars as improvisational acting, and we never had any complaints for the three classes that used it. They really enjoyed it in a way that they did not enjoy working in Heritage Key or working in Second Life more generally. Some of them came to enjoy Second Life, but I was always fighting their resistance to this. Our students on this campus, at least, are not gamers. They see it as what they've been told by their parents, that it's a waste of time. They're very careerist. They don't game when they go home except casually. So you don't have a World of Warcraft cadre on this campus. These kids are worried about what it'll do to their business careers later. You have to convince them of the worth of every single thing they do. In some ways, they're more like adult learners in that regard. So that's one reason, and that's how I answer the question about relevance and return on investment. By reusing it several times and getting the student enjoyment, it's worth it. Let me scan to see if there are other questions. And we've still got plenty of time before John comes on stage, but I want to give him plenty of time to set up. Are there any questions I missed here? Yeah, it is advantageous that I can pay easily out of pocket for this. I didn't have to go to my university. I could go back, though, with a proof of concept if we wanted to have another sim. And our director of our digital scholarship lab is considering a virtual world to do 3D representations of data. We're going to see if that's possible in OpenSim, because it's obviously a lot cheaper. And again, he doesn't need an entire virtual world for this. All he needs is one sim somewhere. We may even be able to host that one locally, set up our own grid. I don't do that because I don't have any reward or incentive in my annual evaluation to run a server. But he may, and he may have the technical skills to do that. Explain why your organization stopped supporting 3D World projects. Combi, it's because there was only 2 of us, and my position was the only one that was continuing who was using virtual worlds. And the return on investment of $300 a month after the tier rose was simply too big for a discretionary budget. So we decided very friendly, in a very friendly manner, I didn't oppose it. We decided to leave Second Life. We just couldn't. Our faculty there's a wide demographic range in terms of age here and technical skills, but virtual worlds just are not understood by people doing tenure and promotion. They are not understood by people evaluating folks on term contracts like me. So there simply wasn't the incentive and reward in place to evaluate this. Other tech projects are beginning to get respect. I suspect that you come back in a decade, yeah, we'll have something in place to reward faculty who take risks in a space like this. But there are other tech projects that faculty can do that involve a much easier learning curve, and I can't blame them. I honestly think if I had to do this over again, I'm not sure I would, because it took an enormous amount of time. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I did get support. I got support. I didn't get support Combi to work in OpenSim. There was no. I mean, my chair in English loves the project, so I'll get. She does understand what I'm doing, and I'll get a good evaluation as a result. But in terms of technical support, no, I have no technical support other than Joe Kay. When we were in Second Life, we did have a person who's on staff in information services who was our estate manager of our island, and could change parcels on the island, could do other things to make it easier for the simulation. So I had that sort of technical support. Any other questions? I don't know if I missed any other ones. But I think there's a shakeout going on with universities that are either making a decision about how to engage in these spaces or finding the first generation that came in and built replicas of their campus. Many of them are just gone. Callie, I'll be bringing my students in this fall. So we'll finish building Usher and the island, Nevermore. We'll finish that this summer. You bet. I may need an actor to be Madeline as well. One of the things about voice is we always have an actor and an understudy in case one of our faculty members can't show up. And one night I had to be Madeline. I was glad we were using text chat. Both of my Madelines were unavailable that night. So that was hilarious. Well, we do set it, if you could do a Yorkshire accent, we decided to set Usher because Poe is it's an ancient home. It's a medieval home, so it can't be in the United States. We decided we would set it in 1847 in Yorkshire for a couple of reasons. The proximity to Whitby, the home of Dracula. We also knew that 1847 was the year that chloroform was invented. So one of the plot threads that's possible is that Roderick is trying different sorts of sedatives to help Madeline with her sleepwalking, and he may be overdosing her with this new substance he's gotten from London. So we decided and also 1847 is the year that Virginia Clem Poe died, Poe's wife, his child bride, and his life was never the same after that. So we said 47 would be a good year. The stethoscope was also a relatively new invention at that time, so we have a prop that people can find. That's an early stethoscope and can confirm whether Madeline is indeed alive or dead. I'm sorry we're getting some background noise here because we've got an event coming in our building and they're starting to show up. Get off my land, I can do that. Get off my yard, kid, you kids. Anything else? Well, thank you, folks. I'll pick up my props so John can set up, and I will be here eagerly to hear what he has to say. Come by Nevermore Sim anytime you want. The hypergrid instructions are there at the URL, and I look forward to seeing you.
Thanks so much for a great presentation, Iggy.
Thank you, Seeker. And I wanted to mention, Gentle Heron has been doing some wonderful voice-to-text transcriptions for folks. If you've been at any of her sessions, be sure to thank her. That's a hard thing to do. I do that for the Virtual Worlds Education Roundtable, and I tell you, she's doing a fantastic job.
Okay, so we've got about just over 10 minutes before Pathfinder, John Lester, comes on. So once again, get up, have a stretch, make a cup of tea or whatever your preferred beverage is for your part of the world for this time of the day. I think, in fact, perhaps coffee for you. I'm looking at the time here in the US. It's 6:47. It's actually 12:47 in the AM here in Australia. Beer